If bodies of water were abandoned cities, the Dead Sea would be at the top of that list. It racks up superlatives. It's more than 400 meters below sea level, the lowest point on Earth, and sits in Israel's hottest region. The name isn't a coincidence. The extreme salinity, about 10 times higher than the oceans, keeps fish and most organisms from living there. The water holds up your body with ease, but it repels almost everything that tries to inhabit it. Even so, anyone who gets there won't be disappointed. The landscape, with muted colors and shapes carved by salt, sticks in your eyes and your memory. There's silence. There's light reflecting like metal. There are shorelines that crackle at a touch. And every step reveals signs of transformation. Ground sinking here, crust breaking there, wind moving the crystallized foam. On a hard, quiet stretch of land, the forces of nature put on a show that's both captivating and concerning. The secret is under your feet. Fresh water bubbling up from underground springs runs through invisible cracks, dissolves thick layers of salt, and weakens everything that holds up the surface. Little by little, the silty ground gives way, opens voids, collapses, and the sinkholes that scar the landscape appear, leaving new marks each season. What's curious is that the danger comes with its own kind of aesthetics. Amid the white of the salt and the brown of the arid earth, these craters look like small oases. Minerals left by the dissolved salt tint the water with vivid greens, cool turquoises, and deep blues. They're splashes of color that break up the monotony of the coast, creating a contrast that's hard to ignore. But beauty comes at a price. The instability of the ground has turned entire stretches around the Dead Sea into alert zones. Places once considered safe now demand expertise and caution. Beaches and parking lots have been closed, trails have been rerouted, and roads that once carried crowds need constant repairs. In recent months, access trails and roads have been shut down. Safety became the priority. With sinkholes appearing more often, the ground around loses stability, and walking, exploring, or even crossing some sections has become risky. This geological uncertainty has slowed new projects. Construction sites were suspended, permits sat in drawers, and people who planned to build backed off. With no predictability, insurers avoid taking on the risk and treat the area as an unviable investment. The effect hits daily life. Hotels run with lower occupancy, restaurants cut shifts, and shops that depended on visitor traffic see their revenue shrink. A region that once fed on tourism and development now needs to reorder its priorities. But the story doesn't end with losses. Between cracks and craters, the sinkholes themselves have created pockets of life. On certain edges, vegetation took root and formed little green islands in the middle of the barrenness. In the pooled waters, there are reports of fish. As salinity drops in some spots, more favorable conditions appear for hardy species, which find shelter in these unexpected reservoirs. At first glance, the Dead Sea is quiet and opaque, but on the edges where sinkholes appear, another story begins. Birds are singing more often there, a sign that these holes may turn into strategic stops for migratory species. In the austere landscape, small pockets of water and vegetation pop up like openings, showing that the ground isn't fixed. It breathes, gives way, and makes room for life to return. This movement contrasts with the lake's hypersaline waters, almost 10 times saltier than the ocean, famous for driving away fish and plants. For a long time, that was the definitive label. A place with no chance for complex organisms. Even so, the sinkholes tell another version, a storyline of constant adaptation, where decay and renewal touch. Where the ground sinks, niches appear that welcome insects, birds, and microorganisms. Places to rest, places to start again. It's worth remembering where we are, a unique salt lake, bordered by Israel and Palestine to the west and Jordan to the east. The reputation for desolation shaped the local imagination for decades, until in 2011, research delivered a shock. Signs of life in environments linked to the Dead Sea, defying long-held belief. Since then, the picture has gained nuance. The region remains harsh, but the presence of sounds, wings, and sprouts points to real dynamism. Nature tests paths and finds cracks. It all started when researchers found signs of life under the Dead Sea's salty crust. The news gained traction with reports from Breaking Israel News about freshwater pools springing up along the lake's edges with fish and patches of green. For many, the scene lines up with ancient promises. Zechariah talks about living waters flowing out from Jerusalem, half toward the Dead Sea and half toward the Mediterranean, in every season. Zech 14:8. And Ezekiel describes fishermen along the shores, from En-Gedi to Neglim, getting their nets ready, and fish of many kinds, just like in the Mediterranean. Ezek 47:10. The Dead Sea sits east of Jerusalem, right in the path of those visions of renewal. Today, researchers and locals are recording springs popping up along the coastline. Where the salinity gives way, pockets of less salty water appear, and with them, small islands of life. It's not the full transformation the prophets announced, but it's a preview that sparks questions. What underground forces feed these pools? What climate and geologic changes are underway? For those watching closely, walking these shores is more than fieldwork. It's finding among salt crystals signs of return. We're talking about a land whose historical and religious weight stretches across centuries. Today, anyone passing along the Dead Sea's edges finds something unexpected. New freshwater pools, some already with fish. The contrast jumps out when you remember that the sea, with shores more than 400 meters below sea level, is coated with a thick salt crust that repels life. The scriptures, however, record a different scene. This region was a fertile, well-watered valley, later described as turned arid by the fire and sulfur that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, as in Genesis 13:10. The story gets a new chapter in 2011, when a team from Ben Gurion University dove into the lake. On the bottom, they found large craters covered by microbial mats that were releasing jets of fresh water. The site knocks down the idea of a totally dead environment and opens the door to a direct question. Where else does nature hide signs of renewal? Despite how extraordinary these discoveries are, the media gave them little attention. That shows a blind spot. We tend to overlook environmental changes in places loaded with prophecy and history. What you see here isn't just a geological phenomenon. It's an invitation to reread the relationship between landscape, faith, and survival. It was while walking the Dead Sea shores without rushing that Siegel came across something unexpected. In a small freshwater pool, fish were skimming the surface in quick movements. In the moment, the scene only stirred curiosity. The bigger meaning came later when she reread with a cool head biblical prophecies that talk about life springing up where there used to be death. The connection hit her hard. Right before her eyes, a sign of renewal. The surprise took on even sharper contours when she noticed a family of ducks landing there, tracing grooves across the water's surface. Life returning to a region treated as barren for so long. For Siegel, that scene told, without speeches, a story of restoration, an echo of promises about resurrection and fresh starts. In the reflections that came later, she went back to the symbol the Dead Sea carries. Being the lowest point on Earth, its super salty waters push the body up, and anyone floats without effort. Siegel saw in that experience a metaphor for God's presence. When we hit our lowest point, there's a lift that won't let us sink. It doesn't mean there's no weight, but it does mean the assurance that there's support. Maybe that's why so many visitors seek out this place, not just for the salts, for the unique landscape, but for the feeling of being lifted when everything feels heavy. And have you ever stopped to think why so many people would flock to the Dead Sea looking for that same experience? At the Dead Sea, the water defies what we expect from a swim. The extreme salinity gives your body instant lightness. You can float on your back for long minutes, stay upright without effort, and even flip through a book as if the lake were a recliner. A simple gesture, letting go of a small stick, turns into a clear demo. It doesn't sink, it stays afloat, almost still, as if the surface were solid. That strangeness whets your appetite for the visit and hooks the curiosity of anyone stepping there for the first time. There's also the story behind the phenomenon. During the Jewish revolt in AD 68, the historian Josephus decided to test the local belief that no one drowned there. He tossed into the water people who couldn't swim. The account is straightforward. They all floated. The lesson for today is simple and practical. Keep the water away from your eyes and mouth. The excess salt burns, irritates, and can turn the experience into a hassle. Before getting in, a lot of people follow the tradition of covering their body with black mud, famous for therapeutic uses. The playful ritual makes for photos, laughs, and a way to prep the skin for the dense soak. Over the centuries, the place has collected names: Eastern Sea, Salt Sea, just the Sea, and harsher nicknames like Devil's Sea, Stinky Sea, and Asphalt Sea. Today, the surroundings look barren, but old accounts describe fertile shores compared to the Garden of Eden, a contrast that will still bring more developments in this story. Bible texts, Genesis 13:10, Deuteronomy 29:23, and Jeremiah 17:6, tell how judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah turned a fertile region into desert. Fire and sulfur sealed that valley's change, and the mark has lasted through the centuries. Today, looking at the Dead Sea, a mirror of salty water surrounded by arid shores, it's hard not to remember that story. The haze that hangs over the surface, the result of constant evaporation, brings to mind the scene in Genesis 19:28, smoke rising from the land like from a furnace. But the Bible doesn't stop at judgment, it announces renewal. During the millennial kingdom with Jesus reigning, a river will spring from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and run to the Dead Sea, bringing life where there used to be salt. Zechariah confirms this promise, and Ezekiel describes it in detail. The water gets deeper with each step, fruit trees grow along the banks, and fishermen go back to casting nets along the coast. Ezekiel lived in Babylonian exile around 597 BC and, even far from Jerusalem, saw God turn a symbol of condemnation into a sign of hope. In this way, the Dead Sea stops being just a reminder of the fall and becomes an announcement of restoration. If a sea known for not sustaining fish can pulse again, what else can be brought back to life when the waters touch it? From the mountains to the east, a current runs down through the Arabah and keeps flowing all the way to the Dead Sea. When it mixes with the salty waters, something unlikely happens. The salt gives way to fresh, and life returns. Ezekiel 47:8-12 describes this scene with precision. Wherever the river goes, creatures spring up, fish multiply, and the banks come alive. From En-Gedi to Eneglaim, fishermen spread their nets. Diverse species, like those of the Mediterranean, fill their baskets. Trees grow on both banks, bearing fruit month after month. Their leaves are for healing, their fruit for food. It's not just a picture of nature renewed, it's a portrait of restoration. The prophet speaks of a people coming home and finding their covenant with God again, like a tired sea that, when it receives new water, catches its breath. That vision crosses the centuries and still raises questions. If a body of water considered dead can be reborn, what about a nation? Israel, once surrounded by uncertainties, now shows vitality, innovation, efficient agriculture, and cutting-edge technology. The country takes its place on the global stage, a sign of ancient promises taking shape. For many, this movement points to the long-awaited Messiah. Some see in Jesus the fulfillment of these words, the one who trades hearts of stone for soft hearts. The flow continues, and each new current hints at what might still burst forth in the steps to come. There's an ancient promise running through the pages of Scripture. God restores, cleanses from sin, and brings life where there was only stagnation. In that storyline, the Dead Sea stands out as a strong symbol. It points to a time of renewal and to a people called back home. Tradition says this restoration takes shape when the Jewish people return from the diaspora after having wandered from the Lord's ways. The message is clear. What was announced will be fulfilled, in the right measure and at the right time. The numbers fuel that confidence. Studies indicate that about 75% of Ezekiel's prophecies, or 81% of biblical prophecies, have already been fulfilled, often with surprising precision. And in the final chapters of the Bible, a scene reappears, a river of life flowing from the throne of God. That image, found in Revelation, isn't just poetic, it sets the stage for the events that precede the second coming. We're living, then, in a time loaded with meaning. The thread Life from Death lights up Israel's recent story and rekindles the expectation of the Messiah. What Ezekiel wrote about 2,600 years ago is back at the center of the conversation. What many read as metaphor is starting to take on concrete shape. The rebirth of the Dead Sea isn't just a geographic curiosity. It sheds light on the present and points to what could still happen. The transformation goes beyond the chemistry of the water. It gives back a vocabulary of hope, of renewal, and for many, a sign of an action beyond our control. When a setting that seemed final opens up to new forms of life, the message is clear. No story is closed, and real beginnings can spring from what used to be a barren shore. As we follow this turning point in one of the planet's most singular ecosystems, we're led to look inward and ask where, in our routines, new beginnings also fit. Some see this process through a spiritual lens. Others treat it as a historic milestone with social and scientific implications. In both cases, the story that rises from the salty shores backs a strong idea. Faith, in science, in God, in the future, keeps feeding the promise of restoration. Thanks for sticking around till the end. The Dead Sea story is just getting started, and we're going to follow each chapter up close. If this topic spoke to you, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what name would you give this place when it comes back to life? See you in the next chapter. Until then,